So close, yet so far. The European Union's proposal to revive the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal is reaching its conclusion after months of tortuous negotiations. And the eyes at the negotiating table are all looking at one country in particular. The US is yet to respond to the deal, but is reportedly more willing to accept now as Iran has dropped key demands, such as the insistence that international inspectors close some probes of its atomic program. This comes on the back of Iran dropping its demands for the US to remove Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps as a foreign terror organization. However, Washington is, as the Iranian Foreign Ministry called it, procrastinating on the deal. But why is this the case? The US has said that it will lift some sanctions on Iran if they dismantle their nuclear program. But is it worth it? And will both sides keep to the deal? Is it in Washington's best interest to sign a deal, even if it's a bad one, to halt the Iranian nuclear program? Should the US revive the Iranian nuclear deal?
So let's get to it. Should the U.S. revive the Iran nuclear deal? You know the rules, dear panelists. You each get 30 seconds to out your initial stance, and we pick up the conversation right after. So, Camela, please take the lead.
Sure. First, greetings to you and other distinguished panelists and the viewers. I'd like to be a bit cautious because it's a sensitive matter for Iranians. If I said I am against the deal, many people were telling me, oh, the Iranians are so much suffering from the sanctions, and I'm not seeing the public interest. But at the same time, I'm saying big deal or no deal, Iran can remain a big threat for the Iranian people and for the international community and for the region these peaceful people are living at. I believe the deal, this current deal, if we should be, it's supposed to be the same as it was at 2015, is very weak, and it would be broken apart or wouldn't last long.
We'll break it down in a split second. Dr. Goldberg, your take?
Thank you. I think the U.S. should revive the nuclear deal. I think the nuclear deal represents the best platform for engaging Iran. I think it is in America's interest, as it is in the interests of the Middle East in general, to engage Iran. It is most certainly in Iran's interest. I think that interest is shared by all parties within the Iranian leadership. I think there's a general understanding that when Iran looks to the future, that future is seen as part of an integration into the region and into the world.
And yes, the regional and global ramifications are definitely something we will address later on in the discussion. Last but not least, Amir Oren, your thoughts?
Remember Donald Trump, the so-called master of the art of the deal? He made a terrible mistake by withdrawing from the deal, prodded by Netanyahu and Pompeo. The deal should be revived, and the implementation could be difficult. We still have a few months ahead regarding the implementation and the fine print, but nevertheless, this deal will limit Iran's ability to go nuclear.
And from this point onwards, please feel free to interact, of course. And in this respect, has the world, in a sense, already lost the battle over Iran's nuclear program, as in the current agreement is not really about uranium, but merely about money, Camela?
For Iranian point of view, for the regime, it's mainly about the money. What they were interested is just inserting this cash to the military, to the nuclear facilities and the program. They have to make it more advanced, more sophisticated, and more protected. If something happened in the future, it wouldn't be as easy as of today. Their program would push years back. I'm saying that because a parliament representative, Mr. Abbasi, a former head of the Iran Atomic Energy, a couple of days ago, he says to the nation, you shouldn't expect much differences in your life if we reach the deal, which means nothing would be changing Iranian people's daily life, not about the prices, not about the expectation like their economy boosted. So this is very frustrating. When I talk to the ordinary Iranians, no one really interested and support this conversation conversation and talks which is ongoing between Iran and the U.S. because they says 2015 we haven't had any benefits from that, and definitely with this government, which is the most extremist one since the revolution representing the nation, it's not serving the people's best interest. For the U.S. too, we know that what President Biden is looking for, he is after, and he wants to just make that up of what President Trump done and withdraws from the deal on 2015. They were thinking if they can cure Iran nuclear advanced program, at least for a couple of days, maybe at the next election they have higher chances to win the next office, the Democrats, and they can go with Iran and have another sort of the talks. Here is just about the money and about the politics dynamics of the U.S. United States plays a major part. European unions too, the regional countries, all they have fears from Iran. Iran is a big threat. They have fears if this deal broken apart, Iran may take big revenge of them. The same condition as we had a couple of years ago. Lots of regional threats and lots of aggressive action against the international community, against of the oil flow shipment in the Gulf.
Yeah, and Dr. Goldberg, speaking of Iran domestically, if a deal is indeed reached, how will it impact Iranians in the sense of their stance vis-a-vis their own government, vis-a-vis the West? Is it likely to change anything?
Oh, I don't think we're going to see any real threat to the existence of the Islamic Republic. To respond to what Camela just said, I think actually that no Iranian government is in a position to take hostile actions against the international community, even though this government is still, in Iranian terms, fairly extremist. I think there is a general consensus in Iranian politics that the only way for Iran is forward, that is through a deal, its implementation, and an Iranian attempt to reap some of the benefits that were promised in 2015. In that sense, speaking domestically, and I'm speaking about the political leadership, this deal and these negotiations have had, I think, an effect that is not necessarily intuitive. They have blurred some of the distinctions between so-called hardliners, revolutionaries, and Republicans, even though there's still a lot of infighting in the halls of power in Tehran. When it comes to this deal, when it comes to the need for this deal, there seems to be a broad consensus. It's not an eager consensus. Iranian politicians are not happy to accept this, but I think there's a general sense of urgency and necessity. That is probably why the negotiations look the way they do, why they seem strained, belabored, why there's always another issue. But it seems like the positive momentum is accruing. We seem to be on the verge of a deal. It may take some time yet. As Mr. Oren pointed out, implementation will be lengthy, but I doubt there is something that could derail this deal at this stage.
But speaking of timing, Iran learned to an extent how to live under sanctions. So in terms of negotiation tactics or dynamics, Amir Oren, isn't Iran better off stalling just a tiny bit longer and put the U.S. in the corner, if you will, humiliate them a bit or pressure them a bit more?
On the most basic level, the choice in Tehran is enriching uranium or enriching Iranians. And obviously, even an autocratic dictatorial regime wants to enjoy some support among the population. But if you look deeper, the Iranians know that they can have no nuclear weapons because Israel has already demonstrated twice in 1981 against Iraq, 2007 against Syria, that it will not agree, it will not tolerate when another hostile power gets nuclear weapons. So it doesn't make sense for them to go into this entire effort only to come up with nothing. So what they want to do is to become a threshold state, and therefore what we have now is a threshold agreement. We are on the very verge of the agreement, and we may have it. Perhaps we will see a prisoner exchange as the first step leading towards the signing. There is nothing really now to stop the various parties from signing.
And Camela, we obviously don't have the final outline of this renewed deal or attempted renewed deal, but there are expected to be some exit clauses to an extent, or rather guarantees of what happens if this agreement fails too, in the form of ensuring investments for companies in Iran. And my question to you is, why allow this exit route? Why set this deal for future failure from the get-go?
First, we don't know really what exactly they were negotiating and going sign off in the coming days. If this is the case, they were giving them Iran some warranty of the breaking down the deal or having the exit clause at this agreement. Perhaps Biden is so much looking into this deal and agreement with Tehran, and Tehran is so much needed to have this breathing time of the 2 years before the next election. Just asking ourselves, President Biden at any survey is not popular in the U.S. Why Iran have to bite at a deal which very likely it can be broken apart soon as any Republican president comes to the power? So they want to get as much as it's possible now. And because Biden is really needed to make that happen, I believe even now they were just showing some harshness, or they were saying they were thinking, or still they haven't had an answer to sell themselves expensive to the Senate. Otherwise, for the Iranians, of course, I believe everything has been done. And then, as the other dear Mr. Amir says, I didn't call them hostage. I called them hostages, not the prisoners. The first sign could be these hostages to be released. They are just asking for cash. Iranian government just need cash. Mr. Naftali Bennett an hours ago tweeted, says $250 billion cash to be released to the regime. We understand that all of them would be spent for militia and, of course, for the program they have to make the regime stronger. And also there are lots of preparation for the next supreme leader and Ayatollah Khamenei's succession. Even that 2 years, it makes them having peace in their mind to make themselves ready for the next step in case if he wouldn't be with them in the coming 2 or 3 years.
Yes, definitely a crunch time, especially if we're looking at the respective political landscapes from Tehran to Washington, perhaps Washington more pressed in time ahead of midterms. We will continue discussing the regional and global ramifications of a deal, if indeed reached, right after the break. Amir Oren, Dr. Ori Goldberg, and Camela Entekhabifard, you're staying with us. We're taking a very short break, but we'll be right back with the rest of the summit. Welcome back to the summit. Thanks for staying with us. And still with us, Amir Oren, Dr. Ori Goldberg, and Camela Entekhabifard. We're staying on topic, but before we dive back into the conversation, let's take a listen to the recent remarks from Western officials on the state of affairs.
There was a proposal from me as coordinator of the negotiations. I said, we have reached this point. I understand this to be the point of equilibrium where neither one side nor the other can make things better. It was communicated to the participants of the negotiation, basically Iranians and North Americans and everyone, British, German, French, Chinese and Russians. There was an Iranian response, which I considered reasonable. It was transmitted to the United States. The US has not yet responded formally, but we are awaiting their response.
This negotiation, it is true, and you all in this room know this, has at times languished. And it has languished at times for months and months because of the action, or oftentimes was the case, inaction from Iran. The notion that we have delayed this negotiation in any way is just not true. We stated in March, when after months of painstaking diplomacy and dialogue, we arrived at the text, essentially, of a deal that we were prepared for a mutual return to full implementation of the JCPOA based on that text that was on the table at the time. It was Iran, of course, that was not prepared to say the same.
So let's get to it. The finish line might be in sight. So can anything still go wrong at this point? Isn't it too late for either side to back down now? Let's kickstart another 30-second round each and pick up the conversation right after. Dr. Goldberg, please take the lead.
Thank you. I think very remarkable needs to happen for this deal not to be finalized. I doubt it will. As far as I can tell, all the parties involved have a vested interest in seeing this deal come to fruition. There would need to be something along the lines of an armed coup d'etat, and I don't even see anybody in Iran who wants to perpetrate an armed coup d'etat. So I think very little, if anything, could derail this deal at this stage.
Not if, but when. Amir Oren, your thoughts?
Well, the technical details have been ironed out long ago, both the core and the margins of the entire formula. The one missing link or missing ingredient is political will. Apparently, both in Tehran and in Washington, there is now political will, and both Biden and Khamenei are going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, but as we all know, both avocados and bananas and perhaps diplomacy can go between ripe and rotten in a split second. Camela Entekhabifard, your take?
Sure. Joseph Borrell called the Iranian answer logical, and then he had a conversation with all of the leaders of the German, UK, US, and France, and it looks like the ground is ready to announce the deal. They were delaying because they need to make a preparation from their supporter and their whom are not supporting this agreement. For example, like Israelis and who are against this deal, and also in Iran, they need to make the hardliners who are not supporting, make them believe this is good for them too. Right. And by then, I guess they're ready to go.
Well, and we're ready to get into the conversation. So interestingly enough, Russia and the West obviously opposing sides when it comes to Ukraine here, very much on the same side in terms of wanting this deal to be signed anew. And my question to you, Dr. Goldberg, any impact on the Ukraine war in sight?
There doesn't seem to be any real impact on the Ukraine war. This has been a thorny issue right from the start. Russia was an obstacle to the progression in one of the earlier rounds of negotiations in Vienna. It seems like the difficulties regarding Russia and this deal have been resolved. I think, again, this is a deal that everybody seems to from which everybody seems to gain something. The Russians get a little more respectability, which they need direly at this stage of the Ukraine war. I think that all parties involved have managed to create a tangible distinction between the issue of the Ukraine and the issue of this deal. I don't necessarily know what that says for the future of the Ukraine war, but it seems say positive things for the future of the deal.
And in this respect, Camela, is the U.S. Seeking as a byproduct perhaps to increase its clout over Iran when it comes to this anti-Western bloc, Russia and China's dominance vis-a-vis Iran?
I have something to add to what Oren says. Iranian perhaps were thinking the United States is so busy confronting Russia in the war in Ukraine, and they saw that as an opportunity at the beginning. They refused the talk. We had a few months that back and forth of the failed talks in Vienna. But when they saw, the U.S. and the other allies are all united against Iran, and the U.S. have time and really want to make these talks to reach a tangible stage. So they went back to the negotiation tables because the consequences, it would be another strikes against Iran nuclear facilities or facing a serious punishment by the Security Council. China and Russia also at this place, I believe they don't like Iran to obtain nuclear bomb. There are reasons for Russia is neighbors to Iran, and Russia understand that there would be armed races also in the region, and China too, and the US too. They may looking like an ally to Tehran, but we remember when it comes to the Security Council of 2013, both these countries voted on Iran punishments and on strong sanctions. Here they played the part. They called the Iran proposal a good one, and they were also working in the other allies to see Tehran make itself committed to sign this agreement.
Amir Oren, do we need to shalshel gas again? Is it all just another manifestation of Washington's need of oil? You know, if whitewashing Khashoggi is part of this bid, so why not a nuclear deal?
No, it's not all about oil. The Americans, starting with Obama and then Trump and now, of course, Biden, have pivoted to the east. Their main challenge, if not threat, is China. Russia lags somewhat behind. They want to stabilize the Middle East. They don't need this conflict with and about Iran. And let's pretend for a minute I misheard your question to also include domestic politics in Israel, if I may. Of course, Lapid is now echoing Netanyahu's position for fear that Netanyahu will attack him as soft on Iran. But you see, Defense Minister Gantz is going to Washington Thursday, and he is meeting with the commanding general of CENTCOM, General Kurila, who has publicly supported the agreement. And Gantz is also seeing the National Security Advisor Sullivan. He is not going to see any of Biden's opponents, no Republican senator, for instance, the way Netanyahu came to Washington in 2015 for the Republicans against the Democratic president. It all means that Israel is acquiescing with the deal. It will get some compensation. Everything will be fine.
And in the short time we have left, Dr. Goldberg, the ripple effect on the Abraham Accords, if at all, the UAE ambassador going back to Tehran, any impact there?
Well, it seems like the Abraham Accords are on the back burner at the moment.
Yeah.
Talk of a coalition against Iran, of a moderate axis, and other such catchphrases seems to have been tossed aside. I think the deal will once again make it clear that in the Middle East, the most permanent arrangements are temporary and specific. And I think most of the countries involved in the Abraham Accords will find their way to negotiate some kind of contextual deal with the Iranians.